everybody, my name is Luke Marr and this is HauteLeMode, and today on HauteLeMode we are doing a review of 3 of the Haute Couture collections from the spring 2022 season. Now listen, this is the first half of our Haute Couture reviews. The second half will come out soon, I promise. I just have to get them done, and as you can tell from the length of this video, I like to put a lot of time into these. But without further ado, we're going to be reviewing Schiaparelli, Dior, and Chanel. Energy-wise, there's no point in me dragging them. I hate that. That's too much energy, and I don't have a lot of it anymore to just be giving out. Talk about context, history, and all those things. And let's begin with Schiaparelli Spring 2022. Daniel Roseberry's Schiaparelli has become a collection that is always one of the most looked forward to when it comes to Haute Couture. The Texan has breathed new life into Schiaparelli consistently since taking over the brand in 2019, and that's not even a lung dress reference. This collection was titled An Age of Discipline, and in a way there is an air of restraint and conservatism that feels rather new. Haute Couture is often associated with dreams and fantasy and drama, but Roseberry seems to be getting back to basics, aka clothing that is meant to be worn by very rich women, but with a fun and intimate twist. So almost only 3 colors existed throughout the entire collection, with a slew of black and white styles opening. Short suits were in, and the first 3 we saw had wasp waists, as well as oversized lapels that felt cartoony. The first look was almost entirely black except for the white trimming on the hat brim, lapels, and shorts, whose lapels helped to emphasize the hourglass figure of the jacket. The next one had a white jacket with a toile motif, essentially showcasing the pencil marks that would help the designer, pattern maker, and seamstresses to construct the actual garment. While it's not a wholly original idea, Roseberry has unabashedly acknowledged his referencing of other designers, and it's commendable to see a designer do so in an era of post-Diet Prada inquisitions. The hooded lapels created on this look is fun, and it's something that has been popping up in other designers' collections too, but Daniel's has provenance, as imagery from 1935 of a hooded Schiaparelli dress exists. The other short suit is in all black with layers of tulle that become more opaque the closer into the chest you look. The tulle is wide and moves over the shoulders, creating an even more exaggerated shoulder, but more than likely is a deception, as the jacket's actual shoulders are probably the same width as the previous 2. While they are summer suits, they can easily be translated into a traditional suit with pants instead, which allows such diversity in terms of style. Okay, maybe not such diversity, but some diversity. A black silk pant is paired with a black bodice with a stiff overflowing white overlay. In the center we can see a golden spiral vine with only 3 leaves on the ends, and in the center. Schiaparelli's 1938 pagan collection looked to forest, foliage, and classic gods for inspiration, and Maison Lesage, the embroidery house, helped bring that to life in 1938. While there is no embroidery on this actual look, Pagan saw Albert Lesage bring back the canetille embroidery style, which is a thread that is twisted spirally, raised, and then threaded. Could this be the reason for the twining vine here? I can't be certain, although belts and headpieces of fake leaves also existed in that collection, so I wouldn't put it past Roseberry. An asymmetrical and oversized collar dress in a gold chevron embroidery harkens back to the cloud-like form seen in his earliest Schiaparelli collections. Also, I think there might be gold chevron embroidery from really early on Schiaparelli, but I'm not sure. While what looks like a gold and crystal earring becomes the centerpiece of the following black and white dress. We can then see another embroidered jacket in white paired with a simple black pant. The jacket is a feat and one of the most impressive looks of the collection, in my opinion, because of its ability to modernize not only an embroidery from 1936 or 1938, or both, but the concept of surrealism for a modern customer. The jacket is a feat, and one of the most impressive looks of the collection because of its ability to modernize not only multiple embroideries from 1938, but the concept of surrealism for a modern customer. The jacket seems to be either made of 2 parts, or, as I personally suspect, an optical illusion where the vest and jacket are the same but sewn together to only look separate. The gold embroidery that pipes the vest section feels similar to a black jacket photographed on the socialite and heiress Millicent Rogers. There is something about the loops that encircle either embroidery or gold in both that feels reminiscent. What feels even more exciting is the gold foliage embroidery on the shoulders and sleeves of the 2022 jacket. The palm tree embroidery first appeared in the fall-winter 1936 Schiaparelli collection and reappeared in the fall-winter 1938 Pagan collection. It's said that Schiaparelli's home in Rome and a trip to Tunisia when she was young was the initial inspiration for the tree, and here Roseberry's reinterpret it to seem as if the trees are growing out of the jacket. It's brilliant, it's whimsical, and it taps into the surrealist nature of Schiaparelli. even though he said he was going for something a bit more imperial this season, which shows in the use of gold and white, I would say. One can't help but think gold embroidered plants growing out of their jacket in an upward motion would be something you might see in a dreamlike state, or for others, a drug-fueled trip. I do not judge. Another Schiaparelli embroidered reference followed. This time it was on a black satin-backed thigh, backwards tailcoat, filled with a radiant gold embroidery throughout the font. I'm happy that I got through that entire sentence. The back is actually a cropped jacket, similar to a spring 2022 ready-to-wear collection, I believe. But the draped satin front pays homage to Apollo of Versailles, which is an embroidery from Elsa's 1938 collection titled Cosmic. Apollo, who was the Greco-Roman god of the sun, was commonly associated with King Louis XIV of France during his reign, and so Schiaparelli drew inspiration from the king's palace of Versailles and a fountain found within it. The gardens of Versailles have many ponds, and one of them houses a gold fountain of the god Apollo and 4 horses rising from the sea, which is where this gold motif originates. If Roseberry was trying to reference the Empyrean, or highest cosmic heaven from ancient mythologies, referencing the reference to the sun god makes a lot of sense. While I've never seen the original Maison Lesage embroidery in person, this version is honestly a masterpiece. It is. It's stunning, and I haven't even seen it in real person. It's beautiful. The cone bra, which Roseberry has explored during the spring 2022 ready-to-wear, is often attributed to Jean-Paul Gaultier, and while I understand his cone bra for Madonna was groundbreaking for its time, the bullet bra style originated in the 1950s, so do with that what you may. Also, Gaultier knocked off Elsa's shocking bottle-shaped perfume bottle with his classique scent, so as referee, I'm calling this whole, oh, he's knocking off the cone bra from Gaultier thing, even. He's fighting for Elsa's legacy. The bodice was made of leather and it looks slimy and shiny, which it's different. That's different. But the cones have golden bands wrapped around them, which feels like a rather new take on the style. I wonder if it has anything to do with the leather looks from the spring 2020 Haute Couture collection, which had leather dresses with gold bands wrapped around them. Tulle was taken on, but instead of just piling the fabric on a model and telling her, walk, Roseberry created an exaggerated flare hem and decorated the sheer dress with gold-plated leather that created a rib and breast motif. The ribs, of course, reference the famous skeleton dress, and the breast could reference a host of surrealist inspirations, but they both add a little bit more dimension to the tulle. The gold-plated feathers that shoot out of the sleeves also reference an early Roseberry for Schiaparelli creation, a yellow leather dress and gloves that black feathers jutted out of in the same fashion. Another tulle experiment sees a black velvet dress that is hourglass shaped with folded over neckline and tail an explosion of tulle strips that create loops. I won't say that it's revolutionary, and I'd say the same about the previous one, but at least it's not the same thing we have seen for the past 5 years from at least 10 other designers. If Roseberry keeps zhuzhing it, I'm sure it will turn out well in a season or two. A strapless black cocktail dress was the backdrop for a maddening set of accessories that exemplify why Roseberry holds such prestige. The gold handbag with face is nothing new for his Schiaparelli, but the fact that it has legs and can almost stand like a bedroom side table gives it that extra pizzazz and deranged baroqueness one loves about the brand. The black patent leather shoes with gold extended toenails are fun, and the brain wide-brimmed hat is stellar. Yes, I said brain wide-brimmed hat. While you might not be able to see it in the runway photo, the aspect of the hat that covers the head, it's gold-plated, jeweled, and does in fact look like a brain. I have found photos of a Schiaparelli pink hat from the 1950s that has rhinestones that resembles a brain. And that seems to be so up Elsa's alley, as odd hats were a big part of what she was known for. One thing that is very apparent is that when the gold that Roseberry sends down the runway is subtle, you'd better do a 360 scan because you're probably missing quite a lot. A long scoop neck corseted top with arched straps that curve around the arms feels like a new take on the meandering straps from last season. The golden bag in the shape of a ringed planet also seems to play on this idea of cosmology that Roseberry mentioned. And speaking of cosmology, 2 looks followed and both had golden rings wrap around the model's shoulder, torso area, almost like gravitational rings of planets like Jupiter and Saturn, which were both gods in Roman mythology. They co-opted from the Greeks. Again, Roseberry's ability to weave references and inspirations together is really rather smart. A black gown follows, and while its drape style isn't particularly impressive, I don't think it's meant to be the main attraction. Again, like, if the look is subtle, you know something else is coming. Schiaparelli herself, though, found popularity during the 1930s, as we know, and the 2 other designers that reigned during that period were Coco Chanel and Madeleine Vianney. Elsa never purported herself to be a designer in the sense of craft. So her drape styles existed, but were never her true strong suit. So would I expect Roseberry to make them some sort of main feature of the brand? Not necessarily. The reason I discuss the look, though, is the golden bag we see the model carry. It's of a face, one that distinctly resembles a muse of Roseberry's, Maggie Maurer. Maurer opened the first 2 haute couture collections by Roseberry and has been photographed extensively for the brand. There's even a photograph of her holding a similar head style accessory at the opening of the Schiaparelli Bergdorf Goodman boutique. Here, Maurer's face has drawer-like openings at the eyes and the mouth, and I wonder if this is a reference to the Drawer suit by Schiaparelli. The suit was the first collaboration between Salvador Dali and Schiaparelli in 1936, and played on the ideals of surrealism in the medium of clothing. Now, we all know that Roseberry and body parts are no strangers, and who knows, maybe clients will want to get some head-style handbags themselves. I had to do that one. A ruched black velvet gown with feather plume headdress and fitted black gown with leather-plated gold streams are runway ready, but without the avant-garde attachments, they could easily double as beautifully made commercial styles for clients. An otherworldly gold dress emerges with the model taking on a space goddess feeling. There is a sheer underlay which is beautifully unclockable and allows the jewel-encrusted gold foliage and root-like structures to really shine. I don't really know what kind of thing is going on there. It's a little bit alien parasite vibe, but I'm just going to say root structure. The gold is obviously a Schiaparelli staple, but one wonders if the plethora of colored gems all over the headpiece and the dress is a reference to German martyrs whose bodies were covered in gold and jewels by local Catholic worshippers because they believed they were protectors from evil. Now listen, hear me out. I'm not just showing you dead bodies covered in jewels for no reason. The intricacies of these martyrs' adornment is almost haute couture-like, and one could see the appeal on Roseberry's end to denote inspiration. Hear me out, that's my hearing. They look similar, you can't tell me that they don't. And also like skeleton dress, reference, ribs. A black gown follows, and from its arms and head there are large circular discs that are embroidered with gold rays. The gold embroidery seemed to be a nod to another 1938 creation by Schiaparelli called Phoebus's Cape. Phoebus was the name given to the god Apollo in reference to his brightness as the sun god, which also explains the sun on the cape. It was often used when he was younger in reference to the fact that the sun was believed to be eternally youthful because of its rising every day. I googled that, so I don't know if that's completely true, but like that's the vibe I was getting. The cape does have these straight rays on the bottom edge of Phoebus's face, which would explain the fact that they sprout from the model's face and the hands in the 2022 version. We could also discuss the fact that there's like a Christ-like element to the gold rays coming from the head and hands, and how that is probably more than likely a reference to Greco-Roman paganism influencing Christianity in the art that depicted Jesus Christ, but like I won't blow people's brains too much. So I'm digressing. The technique of these disc-like structures is actually called parabolic or parabolas, and it was invented by Pierre Cardin, who worked for Elsa Schiaparelli for a short time. Cardin has said in interviews that while he enjoyed his time at Schiaparelli, it was incredibly short and didn't inspire his work all that much. But Roseberry's penchant for reigniting elements of other designers who worked for or were inspired by Schiaparelli comes in as he's recreated the parabolic technique. I understand the claim of copying, but Roseberry has never made it unknown that he isn't inspired by a plethora of designers, and so I kind of find it commendable that he utilizes their techniques and gives them his own little spin while still incorporating elements of Schiaparelli history. For the most part, like nothing is technically original, so like I know that I used to be like, oh, that's a copy, and I mean it's still bad to copy in certain contexts, but like unfortunately nobody's really thinking about Pierre Cardin unless a bunch of other designers are referencing him. The finale gown is a black silk dress, which is probably a reference to the bias cut technique of the 1930s, developed by Vianney. Again, Roseberry isn't purporting himself or Schiaparelli to be the most amazing drapery house, and so the simplicity at which a assumed silk charmeuse column dress falls isn't a feat, but it works. It's a dress. The element of excitement comes at the breasts and the back in a black satin that recreated a specific cone bra that was developed by Gautier. Again, I will not say that Gautier invented the bullet bra, but I think this particular style of it, seen first in 1984, was most definitely his invention. Instead of the orange ruched velvet, the black satin creates these spirals and then moves to the back to create a long satin train. It definitely revolts against the traditional white look to close out an haute couture show, but then again, Schiaparelli, subversive. Put them together, this is what you get. In reality, it's a nice look, but could have probably been spiced up just a little bit for the runway finale moment, in my opinion. But overall, Roseberry is a brilliant designer. With a house like Schiaparelli, it's shockingly easy to flounder, but Roseberry has honed the brand's signature house codes into something far more modern and intellectual than previous designers at the house, not including Elsa. He manages to both create commerciality and eccentricism while drawing the intrigue of a wider audience through the avant-garde. And this season, I think it's very evident that when he leaves behind the notions of surrealism, which is kind of like an albatross tied around the house of Schiaparelli and its designer's neck, he does it kind of freely. He feels light and airy, and yet able to make good clothes. So here's to more. Okay, so we're back, different setup. I don't really feel like finding my lights and doing all that, so we're using natural, au naturel, thank God. And with that, let's get into Dior. Now, Maria Grazia Chiuri Spring 2022 Christian Dior Haute Couture collection, yet again, disappointed. I'm at peace with the idea of the de-exaggerating silhouettes and rethinking femininity without the involvement of the male gaze, and while that is most definitely diametrically opposed to the history of Dior, there are many designers that could do it extremely well. I just don't think she is one of them. The importance of craftsmanship was the inspiration for the season, and understanding how that plays into the creation of an haute couture garment from start to finish was what Chiuri wanted to portray. I'm working on being kinder in the new year. This might be where it ends. She began the collection with an asymmetrical leotard, and two others unfortunately emerged soon thereafter. This is genuine laughter. It's like nervous laughter because I just can't believe that it actually happened. The first leotard is made up of a gray crystal circular embroidered motif with triangles of either black crystal or sheer fabric creating those shapes. In and of itself, it's hard to look at, but when paired with crystallized tights full of yarn loops, it becomes rather unbearable. I don't think I've ever actually laughed before, but yeah, this one was bad. I would assume Chiuri was trying to reference leg hair, an element of femininity that is often looked down upon, but most women could grow it themselves, and five-figure tights probably won't be necessary. Just putting it out there if that's the inspo. A black and gray version follows in what feels quite cubist with sharp lines and gradients, but again falls rather far from favor. While the black leotard that matches the tights at least allows some sort of ability to forget it's a two-piece styled together. I feel badly for whatever Dior ambassador will no doubt be forced to wear these looks because clients more than likely won't, and I've come to realize that whatever the clients don't wear, it's getting put on a celebrity. You know what I mean? The celebrities are low rung for them. They're like, ooh, she wore it? She wants to wear it? No. Ugh. Yeah, that's how rich these people are. Whatever is leftovers for them that doesn't get picked goes to the celebs. A sheer sleeveless jacket in a fishnet motif was paired with a checkerboard style skirt that felt like a less exaggerated take on the classic Dior new look. This is where Chiuri shines. Her ability to dilute the exaggerated silhouettes of Monsieur Dior has often been seen as a problem by many, myself included, but in a way it subverts the very history of the house. It might not be as exciting as Yves Saint Laurent's beatnik collection. I know maybe it's a bit dramatic to mention those two things in the same sort of sphere, but bear with me. But it seems to have a similar spirit of taking the bourgeois femininity, high class, conservatism, and making it a little bit more realistic for the everyday person, even though the everyday person can't actually afford any of this stuff. I didn't say it was perfect logic. It's just logic. Crisp white styles arrive, one a knee-length coat paired with beige tights and silver loops, emphasizing the brand's history of embroidery. The embroidery on the jacket evokes the shape and decoration of what is, in my opinion, a Rococo gilded picture or mirror frame, which Christian Dior seemed to have in his Chateau de la Colnois. That was his summer house in provincial France. The use of decorative buttons, which Dior did utilize himself, does help to create an added texture as well as border. While the look isn't the most exciting, I'd rather see simplistic garments with beautiful embroideries from Chiuri's Dior, so it at least harkens back to the Monsieur himself. Two incredibly clean white sets followed, one a simple pantsuit and the other a maxi skirt with a parting coat. I'm not sure if there's a word or term for coats that only button at the top and then sort of fall away as they descend, but until I know, I'm calling them parting coats. So this parting coat, it slid up the sides, which is actually kind of magical. It's nice. And while the maxi skirt might not be spectacular, it allows the coat to be the star player. A double-breasted mini skirt suit follows, possibly a nod to the spring 2022 ready-to-wear collection that was heavily inspired by the 1960s. And as much as it can be appreciated to see Christian Dior day suits be recreated in a more modern iteration, the proportions feel off. The jacket is a lovely recreation of the bar jacket from spring 1947, and Chiuri has done a good job of toning it down most definitely, but the length of the skirt is still kind of awkward. Clients can obviously lower or raise them themselves, but something a bit shorter or a little bit longer would have felt less awkward on the runway. A black double-breasted bar pantsuit followed. Wasn't miraculous, but I will take it. Well, the first of many sheer dresses emerged, a light beige, part lace, part gauze dress, and it could have been nice. The lace at the sleeves and the bust area, it's gorgeous. It's very light. It's almost transparent. It's so light. And had the entire dress been made up of it with sections of the matte gauze, it could have just been miraculous. But the skirt, which thankfully didn't have a belt, was heavier, and the motif on the lace more apparent, and when added with the silver sequins, just ruins the subtle beauty of the top. A duo of gowns follows, both with busts that are ribbed, almost like ottoman fabric. Now, Dior used the fabric in his fall 1952 collection, and it seems Chiuri took a little inspiration from there. The black and white versions are wrapped around the bust in the style of a fichu, which is sort of like a little shawl that women would wear, and have matching neck details in the ribbed fabric as well. I initially thought the dresses were maybe references to Catherine Walker's gown worn by Princess Diana in 1987, but I also wonder if Chiuri was keen on recreating Lord's red carpet hair scarf for her less ostentatious customers. You know what I mean? The ones that don't want to wear hair around their neck like that. The checkerboard returns in silver embroidery on a sheer dress and white skirt suit, again reinforcing a 1960s swing, and a slew of gray looks then emerged and were more than likely references to Dior's favorite and often used color of Trianon gray. They weren't amazing, but I wouldn't really expect them to be. Now, a few accordion pleated dresses were shown in gray, cream, and black. The gray version was rather sweet with its little small cape, and the black and the cream versions were rather trimmed in shape, which is not unusual for her. Dior himself sometimes belted pleated dresses, but usually the skirt was the only pleated part, but he did this because the belt created a more exaggerated hourglass shape, tying in the whole new look situation. Chiuri's refusal to truly embrace the silhouette is somewhat admirable, but puts her work at odds with the archival style she's often using as inspiration, and I believe this is why her collections almost always fall flat. There just isn't a way to recreate the drama of the new look, but then also make it like kind of modern. A feathered shirt and skirt hit a little too close to the spring 2016 Valentino collection that Chiuri and Pier Paolo Piccioli created. I can't detach the feathers and the rhinestone circles from the horrible feathers and faux bone necklaces. That was a very horrific clusterfuck of different African cultural dress, accessorized with racist and derivative stereotypes throughout. It's in Chiuri's best interest to retire any look that even remotely resembles that collection. A white pantsuit, cream trench coat, and sheer silver embroidered gown were fine. Don't get me started on the hideous, heat-manipulated tulle gown with overflowing busts. It's just not good. That's all. Who designed styles like this initially? Christian Dior? Okay, let's leave it that way. A black square shawl covers a button-down shirt and black trousers and might be a reference to the spring 1957 collection. Now, the Libre line housed the Normandy Afternoon Ensemble, which has a similar feeling, and Chiuri seems to have recreated said feeling. It's definitely not as stark as the original styles, but at least it seems to be a way for Chiuri to dip her toe into the idea of fantasy garments, but I'm saying that fantasy very loosely. Two sheer asymmetrically draped dresses then emerge. The beige style is bearable because of its lack of tights, but the loop tights are just still visible under that black style because of course it is. A crystallized bust with white maxi skirt is more than likely a reference to cutaway busts that Dior himself created throughout his tenure at his own brand. The 2022 version is a lot deeper, and it's filled with a white fishnet bodice, which makes it rather sweet. A sheer gown that is covered in a white fishnet motif with embroidery at each intersection exists, and it's gorgeous. This truly does capture the beauty of Dior embroidery practices and design, and with foliage motifs and decorative buttons, it only furthers the exquisiteness. Why this wasn't the finale dress, I can't tell you. I'm not the stylist. whoever is, you need to go to penance. You know what I mean? Like, you gotta go. You gotta go talk to somebody. A bias cut silver dress, black velvet cape, and a white guipure lace dress also follow, but they don't do much for the excitement aspect of the show, but I'm sure that they're all part of Chiuri's demonstration on craftsmanship. Do with that what you may. Now, the finale look was a gold fishnet dress with floral embroidery over a leotard, and it's nothing really to look at. Maybe it's a reference to chainmail dresses of the 1960s, but even then, I feel like that I'm reaching, but for my own sake. Overall, Dior is no longer worth raising my blood pressure over. I don't think it's worth it for any of you either to do such a thing. Maria Grazia Chiuri's motive is to continue to steer Dior in a commercial direction, and unfortunately we all just kind of have to grin and bear it. Luckily, Kim Jones's menswear has become a highlight, with the most recent collection translating Monsieur Dior's house codes into a more masculine sensibility, and I'm just gonna go relook at that again. I'm just gonna keep disassociating. It's really helpful. You should all try it when it comes to Dior. Next up, let's talk about Chanel. Now, Virginie Viard's Chanel was a rather tepid affair, as per usual. A live horse during an indoor fashion show isn't exactly a solar panel runway, or even close to a brasserie, so even the live entertainment portion was lackluster, which kind of expected at this point. I would have really enjoyed if it just shit on the runway, but like, a girl can dream. But more importantly, Viard mentions that she was inspired by the summer months, the 1920s, and the quote, feminine side of the Constructivism movement. And to be honest, they're really not far-flung in the history of the House of Chanel, so like, claps for Virginie. The collection began with a few tweed pantsuits. The first was rather lovely. A gorgeous blue collarless jacket with subtly decorated buttons was paired with a loosely fitted pant and two-tone shoes in black and white. And that's the last I'm going to talk about, the two-tone shoes. While for Dior, Valentino, and Schiaparelli, fantasy is part of the package, Chanel is a house that only requires a beautiful and utilitarian style. This seems to easily be that. Another blue style followed, but this one was far less boucled and was piped in white with silver crystals. The jacket was slightly flared towards the bottom, and when paired with a looser pant, it still worked. The pants were a bit risque for Viard as they were slit up the sides, which allowed a breathability not often associated with tweeds. A yellow suit with a puffed pant and black motif woven in helped by a cuffed ankle, although it felt less superb than the previous one. I wonder though if the black and yellow is a reference to the Russian Constructivist movement. Now, I'm going to talk about this for a little bit because it's important. The Constructivist Art Movement took place in Russia after the fall of the Tsar and the rise of the Bolsheviks, so think after World War I. Art was less about depicting associations with materials, but more with showcasing just their utility. Black and yellow were quite prominent during the movement, with Alexander Rodchenko's Trekornoe beer ad, I apologize to the Russians, being a good example of how the colors existed within graphic design at the time. Trekornoe? We're not going to try that. But this look is also a good segue into discussing whether or not these looks actually support the initial VR inspiration. And shockingly, they do. While most would associate the 1920s with the flapper age, and you're not wrong to, Chanel herself was prone to putting pants in her spring-summer collections, and because she was one of her own greatest models, she wore them herself, and that was even as early as 1913. There were few that could make pants or trousers on a woman classy, but Chanel did it, even though in Paris it would have been technically illegal at the time unless one was riding a bike or a horse. And Chanel was riding a lot of things. Horses and bikes, I'm sure, included, but like, at the point that she's wearing the pants, she wasn't. She said she liked them during the warmer months because it was impossible to climb up the ladder of the boat in a skirt, which is referring to the fact that she was riding around on the, quote, Flying Cloud, a yacht owned by her then boyfriend, the Duke of Westminster. Now, Chanel could push these boundaries of what women could wear because she was kind of in the upper crust of society. She was also kind of dating one of the wealthiest men in all of Europe. And so who would put a fashion designer that dressed French society in prison for dressing just a little bit further ahead than the other members of the demi-monde? Another tweed jacket with silver trim follows, and again, it's nice, but it's paired with a feather pant. Now, Chanel was using feathers in her Haute Couture as far back as the 1920s, so that tracks, but the pairing of the two here is confusing. Maybe had the pant been a jumpsuit? Or a dress, or even just matching that sort of burgundy color. It could have communicated wearing a tweed jacket over top, but the pant just seems like a disservice to an otherwise lovely piece of tailoring. A long coat in a cream is another nod to Chanel herself. This time the coat is textured in an almost waffle fashion, everywhere except the hips. Now, There we can see the star motif emerge, which is a reference to a star mosaic found in the Albazine Abbey, the orphanage where Chanel grew up, which was where Chanel found lots of initial inspiration. Black and white, because of the nuns. The stars are 5-pointed, both here and on the coat, and coincide with the fact that Chanel was a Leo, the 5th sign of the zodiac, and explains the numerical choice for the Chanel No. 5 perfume. I won't say that the look is too much to, well, look at, but at least Virginia gets brownie points for the reference. The tweed mini dress that follows is an easy commercial success in my opinion, while the sweetly tied braided strings are a great nod to not only the nautical elements of summer, but the fact that Chanel was a regular on the French Riviera and its yachts. The pink A-line tweed dress immediately after this is also just another good example of nicely made clothing from Chanel. The fit is impeccable and fits into the initial Chanel credo of making good clothing that won't make women look helpless or like dolls. Viar has started to also develop her own little Chanel-isms. One that she continually experiments with is cutaway techniques, here seen in skirts. Essentially, dresses made up of lace, wovens, or printed materials have matching skirt suits placed over them with skirts that barely connect and expose the skirt of the dress underneath. We saw it during spring 2020 Haute Couture in a subtler manner, but for fall 2021 Haute Couture, one skirt was just layered over the other. I think this is the best interpretation thus far, but maybe a more demure approach in terms of motif and color could help. A Breton striped suit with a culotte-style cut of pant was next and was fine, as well as a nod to Chanel's own popularization of the style. The proportions of the suit seems rather clown-like, but the embroidery of the stripes and a subtle nod to braided rope is what Haute Couture is all about. You can always change the silhouette. A peplum-style top is placed over a mermaid skirt, all in a houndstooth motif, and it has a 1930s appeal to it. This is probably a more structured take on Chanel's romantic period from the 1930s, and again, works. Viar doesn't do drama often, so when it presents itself, I'm grateful. And the use of a peplum to accentuate a drop waist dress length while adding a mermaid skirt for a more lengthy silhouette is very well done. Metallic embroidered dresses follow, one in black and silver and the other black and lime green. The crop jacket on the silver look adds a bit of elegance, while the sheer panel that flows over the dress creates an element of confusion and wonder for those gawking at it. It looks nice, so the need to understand it dissipates. As for the green version, the high slit is rather unappealing and just feels banal, even though you've put key lime green embroidery on a dress. Another questionable moment appears in a sheer dress with trellis motif, but the embroidered shawl is concerning. The slit up the dress is actually rather nice, but why add an asymmetrical bib with a sutured circle motif that makes the model look like she's ought to have just finished her dinner in her high chair? The thing about Chanel is that trying to update and tap into her romantic period of the 1930s seems very difficult for Viar, and Lagerfeld to a degree before her. On one end, Viar with this look is trying to stick to the wearability credo, but then adds childish embroidery, clashing patterns, and wraps it all up in heinous proportions that makes it hard to take her seriously. Up until now, I think I've been quite polite, citing references and trying to explain what many of us would see as ridiculous. But when looks like this arrive, even mentioning the history of Chanel's drop waist dresses of the 1920s or Breton striped shirts, like not much more than pointless explanations for poor styling. The layers of fabric at the waist on the dress, when paired with the confusing bow, shaped embroidery feels off. There's a reason I think it's been done, but I think I'll save that for later in the video or just a later date. In general, a drop waist organza dress with tiered skirt is lovely by itself, and when paired with a cropped cream tweed bolero with camellia epaulettes, it's even better. It's light, feminine, and has a beautiful embroidered bodice, all without feeling old-fashioned. Viar easily combines elements of 1920s and 1930s Chanel house codes, and it's a highlight in my book. We go from crazy to like, oh, that's nice, but there's never any in between. More drop waist emphasis ensues. The first two we'll discuss are sheer dresses with vertical stitches made evident. They both are more opaque above the bust, but become more sheer after they hit below the bust line. It seems like it's an attempt to make the stomach accentuated more, but it looks quite strange with the length of the gowns. On top of that, the drop waist godets of pink and black fabric are strange, and the alleged Art Deco motif of embroidery doesn't really help. The origin of these triangular embroideries I initially thought was sort of Art Deco, which is why I just mentioned it. And as you can tell when I write these videos, there's a little bit of time in between sometimes. Again, this Art Deco thing would make sense, but considering VR alluded to Russian constructivism, let's discuss Coco Chanel's obsession with Russian cultural dress. During the 1920s, there were a few Russian aristocrats that escaped the Bolsheviks and arrived at different European capitals. One was a set of Grand Duke and Duchess who were the Pavlovnas, Dmitri and Maria, if we're being personal. They were acquainted with Chanel, and it's also alleged that Chanel was sleeping with Dmitri, as well as being his sugar mama. But his sister Maria didn't want to go down that same road. In general, I will just say if you look into Miss Gabrielle Chanel, the whole sleeping with men of certain classes is not out of the ordinary whatsoever. Now, according to Maria's own memoir, after refusing to pay for an embroidered silk blouse that she deemed too expensive from another vendor, Chanel decided to let Maria have a shot at embroidery because she said she could produce them for cheaper. Now, Maria eventually built her own workshop and often found inspiration in the textiles of her homeland, Russia, which coincided with Chanel's own lifting of inspiration from Russian peasant dress. Now you can see in those peasant dresses that Chanel did the angularity of the motifs, and so I wonder if this is where some of that inspiration is coming from. The other dress with vertical stitches has an embroidered bust with a chevron pattern with small spurts of color popping through. I'm torn because again, constructivism could be the true inspiration here. There was lots of triangular motifs in the graphic design of the period, and Red Wedge by L. Lizitsky is a good example of that. But we could also say that the chevron motif is commonly found in tweed fabrics, which Chanel began making in Scotland in the 1920s too. So the real references are hard to sort of pin down in this regard. The tiered skirt in blue and purple, though, I'd actually rather not track that inspiration down, though. I don't think it's like a horrible thing. You know what I mean? Like the cut of it is kind of interesting and fun and has like a high-low skirt, drop waist moment, but the blue and the that I'm not understanding. You know what I mean? Subtlety. Let's go back to that. That feels very Chanel herself, because we can't have it all. The exposed stomach sheer moments continue with the first taking on a crop t-shirt cut, then flowing into a low-waisted tiered chiffon skirt. Now the skirt is full of darkened colors and each trim is trimmed in embroidery, which is of course very haute couture centric, but it's difficult to look at. The inspiration is no doubt probably the 1930s romantic period again, but it's hard to reconcile with the fact that the almost 100-year-old garments of then look far more modern and chic than their descendants. Another flouncy dress comes with a sheer stomach but beaded crop top. The graphics of harsh and strict lines with blue and pink flowers on top of it could be a juxtaposition of constructivism and the beauty of like floral embroidery, but even if that's the case, it's not really super appealing. And as for the skirt, the black tier with white trim moment at the hips and hem are still awkward no matter how many times I whisper to myself, it's just a reference to the 1920s. It's just a reference to the 1920s. It's just a reference to the 1920s. The asymmetrical dress that followed was awkward, and while it's understandable to see draping, you know, 1930s, draping, Chanel. Because like Chanel was herself a seamstress and knew her way around the technique, it's evident maybe VR doesn't as much. The dress feels sack-like, but doesn't seem to intend to be, while swags of fabric falling down try to add a somewhat dramatic appeal, but they just don't. And a graphic gown follows with a puffed skirt element that falls into a reverse mermaid bubble skirt, and it's really nice. You know what I mean? Like, it's cute. The elements of constructivist graphic design are apparent on the circular motifs imbued with lace and embellished panels, and are a possible reference to one of constructivism's greatest contributors in terms of textile and design. And it's just, it looks good. You know what I mean? Like the lace, it's good. Lubov Popova was initially a painter, but got closer to the form of constructivism and decided to help push its reach by creating mass-market textiles during the 1910s and 1920s. Now, I will say with Popova, it was textile design and eventually fashion as propaganda for communism, but the West has been doing that for centuries, so like, I'm not judging, you know what I mean? Like, don't throw stones from glass houses. But it's intriguing to see communist art and design being reconfigured for some of the richest people in the world. And no doubt there are Russian clients of Chanel who maybe will yearn for the motif as a historical ode to their country's history? Who knows? I should also mention that the bubble style feels like a rather sweet way to embrace the drop waist without it feeling too sacky. And I don't even mean that in like a naughty, perverse way. A black feather dress feels like the best way to recreate the 1920s, cut without it feeling like a poor fashion plate recreation. Call it hot flapper summer this year. The feathers move beautifully and added a somewhat train to the back, which helps give it even more sway. And then there's this asymmetrical embroidered top, which falls far too low for comfort. Again, it's evident why the length was chosen, but that doesn't mean it looks good. And paired with a feather skirt, it just feels even more strange and awkward. Now, a white halter gown follows, and honestly, I got a little teary-eyed seeing it for the first time. It is downright gorgeous. The silk just falls so beautifully. Even the little pool of the top separating itself from the skirt, it's just is perfect. It's not too baggy where it looks unfit, but rather it just gives like a considerate amount of space for the wearer to breathe. The crystallized neck is fine, and the stripes created throughout the crystallization, it also allows one to see that there is a bodice underneath, and it all just sort of works well enough. But from the back, the gown is a masterpiece. You might say that there were no backless styles in the 1920s, but I disagree. Cecil Beaton, photographer, socialite, and artist, sketched a beautiful scoop neck back dress from the 1920s in the book The Glass of Fashion, and there are photographs of not as plunging necklines from that period, but definitely plunging necklines. Now, like the deep plunging back of the Chanel gown, it encompasses a bow that falls rather low, but here VR mixes in the slinkiness of the 1930s Chanel period too. There is an evident embroidered bodice that one can see from the back, but it doesn't at all take away from the striking beauty of the gown's back, and could easily be removed for clients that would want to bear almost all. You know what I mean? Tout chaison, as a famous scholar once said. The silver asymmetrical top with full skirt is rough, but the skirt, it's rather lovely. It's understandable that haute couture is about showing a variety of elements for a client to see what is possible, but sometimes it seems a bit too widely styled that it ranges on deranged. The skirt's crystal embroidery and feathers that create a 360-degree V motif is lovely, and again, maybe a reference to Chanel's Russian kitsch or the Art Deco period, but either way, had it just been made into a dress with a lovely little top, it would have been killer. Absolutely killer. A similar style followed with the V motif and flounces instead of feathers and crystals, and it works far better than its predecessor. The floral embroidery of white on green is so delicate, and the fact that it stops at the bust gives it a fun empire waistline feel. Now, the black satin sash wrapped around the model's waist that creates a train is fine, and if done in all white, would have made a more unique take on wedding dresses, but it's fine. We then can see a white dress with feather peplum, and it actually might be another nod to Gabrielle Chanel herself, which is enjoyable if you really like fashion and are not thinking about her as a person, more of her as a designer. Now, the white spaghetti strap slip dress with black bow and silver cascading embroidery throughout is probably a reference to Chanel's own period of white clothing found often in the 1930s. Her use of black and the invention of the little black dress was cemented in the 1920s, but after the stock market crash in 1929, white became a color she was known for as well. She wore a gown of white in 1928 to a ball that was well documented in the papers of the time, but there are no photographs of it, so we don't know what it looks like. But again, you can really see that Chanel herself wore what she made. And in 1933, she showed an all-white collection that was deemed very innovative and helped to remove the color as solely used for wedding attire. I even wonder if the look is a reference to a profile written about Chanel in the 1932 book Prison et Paradis by Colette, where a dress described as a white vapor with long pleats splashed with crushed crystal is mentioned. I saw it and I said, Virginie, she's probably a reader. There was that library collection. She likes a book. I bet you $5. Now, the finale look is, of course, a white wedding gown, which VR's predecessor, Lagerfeld, sort of brought about with haute couture at Chanel, even though Chanel herself detested the practice of a wedding gown as a finale in an haute couture collection. So we pick and we choose. It's like the Bible, you know what I mean? The designers, they pick and they choose what the initial innovators loved or did or said. A sheer parting overlay partially covered a satin dress, and then there was silver embroidery at the bust and at different sections of the sheer overlay. Now, compared to the dresses just seen, it falls very flat as a finale look, but I guess the blue camellia bouquet was nice enough. Overall, Chanel was decent. The inspiration was a nice tie-in to Gabrielle Coco Chanel herself without feeling gimmicky. There, of course, needs to be a firmer editing process for VR, but the elements of constructivist art, French Riviera, summer chic, and 1920s inspiration were done well to a degree. Unlike Dior, Chanel has a pass in terms of being less than exciting. She thought Dior was way too much. I think she would have hated Karl Lagerfeld's whole era, and Karl knew that Chanel would have hated his whole era. He very specifically made art that said, you're fucking up my house. So he knew She knows. Virginie gets less of a scolding than Maria Grazia in terms of the house because, like, again, Chanel was kind of like, just clothes. While Lagerfeld changed the modern expectation of the brand's collections, VR to a degree kept Chanel's own ethos alive. One just hopes VR progresses with the next collection rather than regresses. So that is the end of the first half of this Haute Couture Spring 2022 review. Jean Paul Gaultier, Valentino, and Fendi will be coming, and I think I'm going to sprinkle in a couple of little other moments, Victor and Rolf, etc., etc. So we're going to work on that, don't worry. But I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and TTYL.